1968, there are a lot of parallels. An election,
So let us have order in America.
Americans want law and order.
protests against racial injustice, social unrest, and even a pandemic.
There was over 100,000 people that died in what was called excess mortality as a result of the 1968-69 pandemic.
So, did a global pandemic shape the US election 52 years ago? On December 19, 1968, the New York Times editorial described the Hong Kong flu as one of the worst in the nation's history. The estimated number of deaths was 1 million worldwide and about 100,000 in the United States. Linda Murray Bullard is a businesswoman in Chattanooga, Tennessee. She lost her mother to that virus on Christmas Eve in 1968 when she was only 9 years old.
When I'm talking to people on the subject of COVID-19, I bring up my mom. I remember her not being able to breathe. I remember her being very weak and couldn't walk or stand up. Those pictures are still very vivid in my head. I probably was almost grown before I realized that it was the Hong Kong flu and not just the regular flu that she died of.
The 1968 flu pandemic was caused by the H3N2 influenza virus. After its summer outbreak in Hong Kong, the virus was brought back to the States by Marines returning from the Vietnam War. By the end of the year, the pandemic hit all 50 states.
The United States actually had worse illness than did a lot of other parts of the globe for the first year.
Dr. Daniel Jernigan is the director of the influenza division at the CDC. He recently co-published a study on the 50-year aftermath of the 1968 pandemic, which found the virus, like COVID-19, caused college closures, slowdowns in business and industry, and threats to Christmas mail deliveries.
The WHO was involved, of course. The Department of Defense was involved. They generated and developed a new vaccine. So this was in the public's perception at the time. It was something that was clearly being communicated from the federal government.
I wonder if my mom was alive, what would that be like?
Linda remembers how her mother managed to take care of 6 children when getting sick, even though they lived 5 blocks from the health department.
She didn't go to get care until right before Christmas. I'm sure if she knew that there was a pandemic going around, she would have went and sought care. But because back then they didn't publicize that we were in the middle of a pandemic, she probably just thought it was a regular cold.
Unlike the 24-hour coverage of COVID-19, the Hong Kong flu didn't capture the public attention in 1968. Historian Nathaniel L. Moyer could hardly find any mention of the H3N2 virus in historical records.
It really struck me because I've spent years and years studying and reading about the Vietnam War, and of course 1968 is a major year in that conflict, and not once had I referred or read any reference to the 1968-69 pandemic.
It's perhaps unsurprising. 1968 was a far more violent and divisive year than 2020. Racial tensions were at an all-time high, and as tens of thousands of young men were dying in the Vietnam War, protests were erupting across the nation, eclipsing the virus.
In 1968, really, for the presidential campaign, the Vietnam War and the law and order issues that were occurring in the United States was really the predominant issue at the time. It wasn't the H3N2 pandemic.
American voters cared most about the candidates' Vietnam War policies.
The only thing that would satisfy me is a complete cessation of hostilities and for the United States to negotiate a withdrawal, the same way they got in there.
The presidential campaign ads centered around it.
Nixon's silence on the issue of Vietnam has become an issue in itself.
We shall have an honorable end to the war in Vietnam.
And in March, its architect, President Lyndon B. Johnson, announced his plan to withdraw from the presidential race. The Democratic Party split.
So you had Eugene McCarthy, then Robert Kennedy, who decide then to possibly run. Eventually, it's Hubert Humphrey that becomes the Democratic nominee. And up to the very end, Lyndon Baines Johnson considered possibly re-entering the race as well. So you had a Democratic Party that was in very much disarray.
Then in April, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, sending shockwaves across the nation. In July, U.S. Senator Robert Kennedy was assassinated. And on August 28th, at the Democratic National Convention, where Hubert Humphrey was accepting the party's nomination, thousands of anti-war protesters gathered outside, and blood spilled on the streets of Chicago when police attacked the demonstrators. With all the social and political upheaval, Richard Nixon ran his law and order ticket.
It is time for an honest look at the problem of order in the United States.
There are a lot of parallels between that time and what's going on now. I know that we were at the end of the civil rights era, and that Richard Nixon's position was he was going to bring law and order back to the United States.
Although Humphrey started to build momentum after promising to call a ceasefire in Vietnam, it was too late to catch up. Nixon won the election by 510,000 votes.
He also promised, of course, a secret plan to resolve the Vietnam War, which, of course, as we know, was a real lie, because he expanded the Vietnam War into Cambodia, Laos, and other places like that. If you look at his personality, he was somebody that was going to try to manipulate American sentiment, and things like the fear that's evoked by looting and rioting in cities is something that you can really kind of hang your hat on as far as a presidential nominee is concerned. I think that's something Donald Trump is trying to do as well.
Are you in favor of law and order?
I'm in favor of law. You followed it.
Are you in favor of law and order?
Now, in 2020, the starkest political division doesn't rest on a foreign war or racial injustice, but the strategies for battling yet another pandemic.
And he talks about don't worry, it's all going to be over soon. Come on, there's not another serious scientist in the world who thinks it's going to be over soon.
President Trump, your reaction?
I say over soon. I say we're learning to live with it. We have no choice. We can't lock ourselves up in a basement like Joe does.
The 2020 coronavirus pandemic has been the most politicized pandemic that has existed probably in the United States history.
In a June Pew Research study, a growing number of Republicans believe the worst of the virus outbreak is over, while the majority of Democrats say the worst is still to come.
I tell people who think it may be a hoax or politically advertised or whatever, I tell them the pictures that I remember are real. And seeing my mother waste away like that for about a month is real. She was asthmatic, and I'm asthmatic as well. I've had double pneumonia, which is part of her diagnosis. I've had that twice. And so, like now during COVID, I am trying to be extremely careful. I just hate that in America, we are so bought into our way of the highway that you have people in the freest country on earth not wanting to give up any of their freedom so that they can save the lives of other people who are vulnerable.
I just think the overall politicization of what is happening with coronavirus is really what's key here, because we have to be able to acknowledge what the science is for this. When we are starting to disagree about the facts of what coronavirus is and how, for example, masks can be used to prevent its spread, then I think we have a real problem.
When needed, I wear masks.
Okay, let me ask.
I don't wear masks like him. Every time you see him, he's got a mask. He could be speaking 200 feet away from it. He shows up with the biggest mask I've ever seen.
Political and racial divisions overshadowed the Hong Kong flu in 1968, allowing Richard Nixon to ride his promises of law and order to the White House. Today, though, the global pandemic divides Americans as much as their views on racial injustice and politics. No matter who wins in 2020, COVID-19 will continue to ravage a divided body politic.